As I said off the top, it is earnings week and a big week coming up with the biggest companies, including TerrAscend, who pre-announced their latest earnings about 2 weeks ago, if I'm correct, along with Ascend Wellness, Trulieve, GTI, Canopy, all the notable names that are on deck, Anthony. So we begin with you. What would you say, or I guess there's some notable indicators you'll be paying attention close to this week as we start to see a lot of companies unveil their latest results?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to TerrAscend that they didn't pre-announce their earnings, but they did revise guidance into year's end. I'm looking to see if they're tracking towards that once the actual numbers come out going into year's end. Ascend, they did pre-announce their earnings, so seeing how they come in line with that. Trulieve, as far as their margins go, I'd like to see at least margin stabilization to margin expansion from them, and they might be able to achieve that with Maryland coming online with their 4 stores. GTI, I mean, I think it's going to be telling if their EBITDA is improving, as they're one of the stories that people do firmly believe that GTI can survive, and I do as well, with or without 280E, if we don't get some sort of government movement. And then Canopy. I mean, I'm curious to see what the rhetoric is and the languages coming out of Canopy. BioSteel has been jettisoned off. From what I've been told, that was a big part of the negative numbers attributing to their degradation in the bottom line. I mean, we keep hearing that the Canadian market is stabilizing, if not growing. Canopy right-sized their business. Hopefully they're selling through in those channels. I'm not looking for a massive number to come out of Canada, but I'm looking for just a stable number to come out of their Canadian operations, and then look at what they, if they signal any movement towards Canopy USA and the US. And then overall, Maryland. I am very, very looking forward to how Maryland plays into the numbers. We've got Curaleaf, Verano, GTI, TerrAscend, Ascend, and Goodness Growth with 4 stores each in that market. Trulieve, the Cannabis, and then Ianthus each have 3 stores in that market. And then you have Maramed with 1 retail dispensary that's operating in that market. So those should be attributing to growth when we get these earnings reports here later this week.
A lot going on, that's for sure. Ben, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I'm looking at just stability, I think, is the operative word, and just no blow-ups on, or no outlier numbers on the top lines or bottom lines of these companies. I think it's going to go mostly to what we've seen in other quarters. It's going to go mostly to trend, and you're not going to see too many surprises. Hopefully you'll see an upside surprise or two. TerrAscend, for example, they pre-announced and raised a few weeks ago their guidance for the rest of this year. So in lieu of that, I think it's going to be good because, the numbers are pretty stable for, the retail operations. And as long as there's no blowups, I think it's going to be good for the sector.
Yeah. Chadwick, hello from Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks for logging on here today. Yeah, it's curious to see what some of these stable numbers as to what you guys are indicating that you want to see. But I think Canopy, as much as we look at a lot of these companies and a lot of big announcements going to be made this week, we still get a lot of feedback on Canopy, and see how that's going to direct. But when you look at this overall earnings, as I've said in a previous podcast, if we get some positive results in this earnings, does this not feel different this quarter than previous quarters?
I don't think anything's going to feel different. I mean, these stocks don't trade on fundamentals. I mean, we've known that for a while now. I don't really expect to see any sort of like aggressive upwards move based on these earnings. However, I mean, at least I'm speaking for myself. I mean, I take these as a barometer for the overall health of the businesses. I can let slip that the sector doesn't trade on fundamentals, knowing that there is stability to these companies. They have a decent cash position, and some metrics are improving and growing, despite it reflecting in the actual stock share price.
Yeah.
I'm just going to see any sort of wave or any sort of like aggressive move to the upside.
Well, I beg to differ, just because if you look at some of these companies that have been like shorted so heavily in the last few months, and they do have some positive results, like look at Ascend Wellness. And if we were to get some sort of announcement pertaining to what Dan said last week, could you not see 2 and 2 put together that we could see these companies, especially when we talked last week with Sammy as well, that in the short term, some of these stocks have been heavily invested, look like they could move quicker than others. Indeed, if we do get some sort of news later this month, Again, that's all hearsay, but positive results combined with a big announcement out of Washington from the DEA. Could you not see some of these stocks, the positive results have been heavily shorted to rip again?
Well, I
That's
mean,
a
that's
different
completely,
conversation,
yeah,
though.
that's
Yeah.
completely different than what you led with.
Earnings is completely
So
different than
yeah,
what
I'm
you see
looking
on.
at this as positive sentiment, basically one after another. If we have
I
this
mean,
within the next
sure,
30 days,
if we get the DEA announcement, you're going to pour fucking jet fuel on the sector.
yeah,
But that's a completely different statement than what you asked originally, as it relates to just earnings. Are we
Yeah,
going
could
to
the
trade? Are
stocks
we
go
going
up?
to
Yes.
trade?
trying to be
Yeah,
positive.
Yeah, the stocks that go up. You got to remember, this is cannabis and retail, and it takes on the characteristics of a consumer staple.
yeah.
So, unlike other industries that earnings and revenues can vary wildly, things are very stable in the cannabis industry. Like they know to a very, very fine degree what revenues are going to be. Right. That's why this sector doesn't lend to any earnings surprises. More like uh, in comparison to like AI or something like that, where revenues are more volatile. It's very, very stable in the sector. That's why we don't hardly see any pre-announcements either way. And that's why probably we don't move on earnings too much, because everything is usually generally in line within 3 or 4 million from the top line, right? So I don't see any surprises. That's a different conversation, though. If we get the jet fuel, could they rise? And absolutely.
Got to speculate. It's my job as a media guy. So stable's the key word, right?
Yeah.
Just for earnings, yes.
Yeah.
Earnings
Hey,
is
if we
gonna be
don't get,
stable, very few
yeah,
surprises.
if we don't get stable earnings and you start to see some degradation in these earnings reports, that's going to be cause for concern.
All signs point in
Um,
that direction, though, don't you think?
yeah, I mean, they damn well better. Otherwise, in some of these major markets are going to have problems. Because I think that you're going to get aggressive numbers out of Maryland with each company, at least the big boys. So, I mean, if they're getting that incremental growth from Maryland, yet they miss numbers, that would be a very bad sign. So question, I mean, I've seen a lot of like kind of backhanded comments today about Ohio. They're like, so the older voters, the geriatric voters that went out to the polls, they were voting against issue 2. How does Florida ever get it above 60%, especially because of the amount of geriatrics in the state of Florida? I mean, me being from Florida, you growing up in Florida, I'd be willing to say that the geriatric population in Florida is different than the one in Ohio.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people 65 and up in South Florida on both coasts are consumers. They're more
Correct.
liberal. They're more liberal than what you see in Ohio.
For
I mean,
sure.
yes, we have that 60% hurdle, but I mean, at least it's my 2 cents that I think we can get past that, and you're not going to see the activism from the older crowd as it relates if it gets on the ballot.
I think that's a good take. From being in our stores quite a bit, that's one of our bigger consumer groups is the kind of the over 65-year age, consumer who's coming in. So that's number one. And number two, look at the net population gain in Florida since COVID, and the bulk of those people
Do
are
we know
moving here.
what is that like? Do you know?
It's a big number. I can pull it for you, but it's millions of people.
And that's not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, and you've got to look where they're coming from. I saw a great stat on CNBC the other day. It's primarily California, Seattle,
New York,
Oregon, New York, Illinois, and what's legal in all those states? Adult use cannabis.
Yeah.
So they're used to being able to go to a dispensary and buy what they want and not have to go get a medical card they got to renew every 270 days. So it's a bit of a if you're going to have a net population gain, as much as I don't like the traffic, it's a pretty good net population gain to have ahead of an election.
Yeah.
Hey, Brady, how much do you trust the Florida justices to actually render a decision on the merits of the case as opposed to getting political? And even if they do get political, does it stand a good chance to pass? Because most conservatives probably at this point support cannabis legalization in general.
I think that's a great, and the last part of that question says a lot. So it's a different conservative group, and for as much as DeSantis has made comments on the campaign trail in Iowa and elsewhere about cannabis, he is the guy that legalized flower here in Florida, and as someone that's worked with his office, he's been supportive of cannabis. I used to call on him when he was in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he was one of the few friendly faces we had when we were going around talking about, safe banking and the Robacher Amendment back in the early days, because he believed in, veterans, because he's a veteran, being able to access this instead of opioids. But on the justices, The nice part about what's in front of them right now is it's a relatively, if you heard from the comments in the hearing, it's a relatively streamlined review process that we're in right now. It's single subject and whether it's confusing to voters. So we're not talking about an abortion law that's, an up or down vote on whether abortion should be legal in Florida. It's not an up or down vote on whether cannabis should be legal in Florida. It's whether the wording of the amendment is in such a way that it would confuse Florida voters. And I think we heard from them today, especially from Justice Labarga, how he's just baffled that the argument against it. So politicizing it, it's the number one, to be completely candid, the political nature of it around a 2020 election and Republicans being worried potentially that, voters are going to come out and vote in favor of it and then vote down ballot Democrat. That's probably the biggest political issue that we have. And I think that's a great question that not a lot of people are talking about, because that is something in Republican circles and leadership are worried about is, okay, how do we address this? And more importantly, can we stop it? If we can't stop it, how do we seize it? So there's outside chitter chatter speculation that if it actually gets on the ballot, it might be something that the legislature wants to take up to do themselves in the 2024 legislative session, which runs from March to May, to try to steal the issue from Democrats. Again, that is you're talking about long shot conspiracy theories, but
they could do that though.
They could do it, and it's been trickling around. And as you saw with the Disney stuff, when the governor says he wants to do something, the legislature falls in line.
Yeah.
So, as I put that at like 1% or less, but they're worried about it enough as a ballot issue to draw voters out, especially voters from these places, these other states that are moving here that already have adult use cannabis that are going to be supportive of it. They're worried about it enough that it's being talked about in those circles.
Yeah.
So I'm less worried about the court, so to say, because it's such a confined review process. It's not an up or down vote on the validity of a given issue. But it's, you can never turn politics off. And as someone that lived and died in Tallahassee politics for close to 8 years, it's about as politicized. Everybody in Tallahassee thinks they're in DC.
Interesting. You make a good point, though, and Anthony, you did as well, that a 65-year-old's lifestyle in Florida is a lot different than somebody who lives in Ohio, right?
No, man, look at all the retirement communities in Orlando and Central Florida. They're all driving around on golf carts with margarita machines and vape pens.
Yeah, they're having a great time.
They're having a great time. It looks fun. I mean, those people are going to go out and vote for adult use cannabis.
Yeah.
I think that Florida culturally is much different than Ohio. Yeah. So one of the questions that we got was quarter over quarter. I mean, it looked like the guide for Q4 was kind of flat from Q3. Is that seasonality and discounting, or are you guys looking to probably let it settle in and then raise guidance going into Q4?
As you know, we were one of the first ones to pull guidance a few years ago, back in the summer of 21. And most companies weren't giving guidance back then either. But this August or so, we felt comfortable enough and we felt like we had made enough progress and had our business predictable enough that we could reinitiate guidance once again. I think we've raised it twice since then. And what we've said consistently over the last few months is we want to put out a lot of shit has, a lot of shit has gone wrong, or, in terms of Murphy's Law over the last few years. And we just want to make sure that whatever numbers we put out there, that we feel super comfortable that, even if a couple of things didn't go our way, that we were still going to hit those numbers. So I would say that that's really the driver of it. I think Ziad said something on the call, when somebody asked him, if you bet him a cheesecake, whether it was going to be flat or up, he would bet it, he'd bet on this team to drive up, revenues and profitability.
So again,
now, Jason, one thing you notice when you look at the report is on the top line, 89.2 million compared to 72.1 million sequentially. Obviously, that's an impressive number. Some of the competitors in the tier one space, they're not necessarily even growing revenue sequentially. So obviously, a lot of it might be Maryland because you're heavily leveraged to that, and you're a little bit smaller in size. But what is the secret to growing over double-digit sequential revenue growth when others are not necessarily doing that?
Yeah, and not just double digit. I think our sequential growth was 24 and change percent. Our business grew by almost a quarter sequentially. And the thing that I'm the most proud of is that if you look at our operating expenses, I'm not talking, our operating expenses as a percentage of revenue went down to like 30 point something. We had originally said back in August that we would that we would exit the year down at 30% OpEx, but picked up like 6 points there. But not just the percentage wise, our absolute operating expense went down quarter to quarter during the same quarter that our revenue went up like 25%. So we're really, I think.
How'd you do that?
How'd we do it? We did it by we had been working for several months on instituting some more expense reductions, just in terms of dialing things in. And like, a year ago we took a huge amount of expenses out, but now we're really like, we're able to go after and sort of take on the projects and things like that were like nice to haves. They weren't must haves a year ago. But since things are clicking and operationally everything's moving along nicely, we're going after some of that, further lowish hanging fruit. And we were able to, like I said, bring on, we brought on 3 stores. Think of all the employees just with those 3 stores and all the other extra activity in Maryland. And we are, very, very proud of that. And like, we feel like we're only in 5 states right now. Like, wait till we get to the scale and the size of some of the other much larger operators. Like, if we're at 27% EBITDA margins here, like we think there's even further gas in the tank in terms of driving better.
That's what I was going to say. So what's next? I mean, you guys are firing in Michigan. You're obviously firing in New Jersey and Maryland. I'm assuming PA is where the next focus is going to be to drive growth if and when we get the adult use conversion in that market.
Yeah, but PA actually, we mentioned on the call, PA was up 10%. Our retail was up 10% sequentially. And I think our wholesale also was up 10%. I'm sorry, not sequentially. Year over year, it was up. It was also up sequentially. I think wholesale was up like 20% sequentially, and our retail stores were up like 8.8. But they were each up 10% year over year. We are back to Pennsylvania growing. Now it's not, it's nothing compared to what it's going to be once rec turns on. But it feels good to be, we're operating way under capacity in Pennsylvania just because the market, won't support, sort of that much capacity. We would be building inventory. But the great thing is, at this much lower capacity, we were able to drive, sort of company average margins, figure in the low 50s, and grow.
Yeah.
So what are you attributing? I mean, what are you attributing to this growth and this affinity with the consumer? I mean, is it brand power? Is it your guys' marketing? I mean, because you guys seem to be going into these markets and just kicking ass into these adult use markets. Yeah, and whatever the TerrAscend sauce is, it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the stuff. It's about the whole approach we've taken with the deep and not wide. It's like if you're competing, I've always felt like even MSOs competing against mom and pops that are in one state.
Yeah,
those mom and pops know so much more about what's going on. They got their brothers driving by the store at midnight and see somebody doing something or whatever. Those are all the things that you lose when you're in multiple states or you're more of a big corporate entity. But even along the spectrum of that, like, how is some other company that's competing in 10 or 15 or 20 states? Like, it's got to be harder for them to compete with us if we're operating in 5 states. I mean, we're just really focused, and we've got the benefit also of that now being in those 5 states. It gives us the experience, the SOPs, the expertise. We mentioned on the call, our yields in Jersey are up like 50%.
Wow.
Year to date, like versus January this year. That was like it was like a virtual, we've been talking about doing a CapEx spend there and spending about $10 million. And we thought it would add about 70% to our flower capacity. But we got almost all of that through what we call our virtual expansion, which means we didn't spend any money and we just got the yields up. So
we look forward to
those are the
seeing
kind of things we want to roll out everywhere.
Now, Kim, regarding your top line revenue, and congratulations on the earnings, by the way. I think the market's spoken. Good performance of the past couple of days. But on the top line revenue number, $275 million for this quarter, and that was down about 7 million sequentially from last quarter at around 282. Yeah, and you probably, I think you opened what, half a dozen stores or thereabouts around that time. So can you explain to the audience why revenues on a per store basis, if you average it all out, is actually going down a little bit? Are there challenging market conditions, and if so, do you foresee that to improve in the future?
Yeah, so there's a couple things going on. I mean, I think it's interesting to point out that, look, all cannabis portfolios are not the same as it relates to state saturation and store spread and market spread. So for us, right, we have some seasonality between Q2 and Q3. Reminder, one of our larger cornerstone markets is in Arizona. Over the summer, I think, I don't know, there was some ridiculous stat that like over 30 days was over 100 degrees, like 110 degrees or something during this time period. It was incredibly hot. A data point that, we look at is last year, actually sequentially, and again, this speaks to seasonality, Q2 to Q3, there was a decline of 6%. So we actually improved and kind of narrowed that gap, if you will, when you look at a 3% this quarter and kind of that seasonal period. So again, different market dynamics for different folks, right? I mean, if you've got folks that are instead over allocated in the Northeast, like if you look at Illinois or even Pennsylvania, which was more of a it's a stronger performer during this period of year, and then it switches, right? Because then you have snowfall come in, blizzards, et cetera. So I would just caution folks that not all, although we talk about, right, it's cannabis earnings and we all are reporting in the same time, and so it becomes a sort of homogenous conversation. It's really not yet homogenous because of the difference in our portfolios from market to market. So that has a big impact, and I think you'll continue to see different patterns of seasonality among these companies for a little while. That being said, though, to your point, I mean, certainly there is continued, I would say, in certain markets, price compression. I think it's important to note that, look, we were still, and we had indicated this previously, undertaken a large inventory wind down initiative for this year. As we brought again our large facility in Florida, in particular, our 750,000 square foot facility online, brought down some other capacity, right? There was some lumpiness there. We actually, in third quarter and towards the beginning of Q4, we're out of it now, had a situation where, it's very difficult to land that perfectly. The team did an outstanding job, but we were actually running short on some flower products. You saw that in our numbers in the OMMU reports, right? Trying to make up for that on the oil side, which I think, again, team did a great job. Now that's coming back, right? Last week, actually, you saw us back up over 40,000 ounces on the flower side, and that'll continue to grow. So some of that is self-created, again, execution. I mean, I think we've got the enviable position of being kind of a market maker in Florida. And so what was interesting to us is that we didn't see consumers trading out of Trulieve. They were just, the entire market was actually shrinking when we actually didn't have inventory in stores. So I think that's indicative of really just the position that we have in the market, and super excited about that Jeffco facility continuing to ramp. I gave a stat on the call that, our potencies coming out of that facility now are averaging 28%. And our costs are just phenomenal. So, I think there's been a lot of skepticism in terms of what kind of product that was going to produce. And it's a game changer.
I mean, speaking about the product. So, I mean, obviously I'm a patient of Trulieve. I've seen the brands that you brought in from the West Coast with Alien Labs, Connected. You're bringing in the more premium brands, and we've seen some other brands enter the space as well as some homegrown cannabis brands. How are those brands performing at retail? Does that make up a large portion of the product mix, being a premium product?
It's a balance, right? I mean, premium in terms of just from a segment is gonna be a little bit more niche, right? I mean, and that's by design. I mean, because you want to command a premium price as well, and some of that has to do with the exclusivity nature of it. You want to do small, more craft oriented drops, right? You want to have more frequency in terms of strains and ins and outs, and so some of that is definitely by design. What I can tell you is that, and what I said on the call, is that certainly we've seen increased volumes, right? In our value in mid-tier and roll one and modern, but we are still seeing a really good steady activity from our premium clientele as well. It's interesting because a lot of our premium clientele, they're committed to that tier. They really want that value proposition, and so they're a little bit more loyalist, I would say, than what we see in some of the other and some of the other consumer patterns.
Oh, yeah, I have friends that are patients that will they only buy black tuna. That's it.
Right.
That is the only strain that they will buy, and they won't deviate. So I mean, whatever they're doing with that strain and that brand, it's definitely working.
I love the point you make about older people have a different lifestyle in Florida versus Ohio. You think there's a reason why Jimmy Buffett plays on a beach in Florida versus going to Dayton, Ohio, don't you think?
Yeah, God rest his soul.
Yeah, great guy, that's to say the least. All right, we want to focus, and I know this is we want to get in front of this. There's just been a lot of questions, obviously, on Twitter and Reddit and whatnot, but we focus on the announcement that was made earlier this week, where you'll redeem $130 million of your outstanding 9.75% senior secured notes. On the other side of that, you currently have $200 million in cash on hand. So based off of this, it's left the investment community. You got to love this. Just the investment community, just, speculating and going out of control. And just, how is this going to happen? So let's set the record straight. Walk us through how this will indeed happen.
Yeah. So we are not, we have not lost all of our marbles. So let's start there. We're not filing, any kind of other like Chapter 11 or anything like that. That's not coming. So sorry for those of you who had that. We did not win I think somebody was like, did they hit the Powerball? Unfortunately, no.
I've heard a lot of different things this week. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so I think it's important to note that 200 million was what we exited the quarter with.
Yeah.
So, right. And what we said that we are continuing to generate cash, and that we are generating cash at now an improved rate from our previous quarters. And so we are continuing to make money. We also said two things as it relates to cash that are important guides for the end of the year in our forecast. We said that we plan to exit the year with at least $100 million of operating cash flow and a minimum of $70 million in free cash flow. So those two facts, along with what I'm telling you in terms of continued cash generation, should, I hope, give everyone comfort that that we are, in a good spot. And as it relates to the debt retirement, it's due. So we could pay it. Yeah. We paid it. We're going to save $20 million in interest with the two moves that we made as it relates to debt reduction. We thought it was a very prudent thing to do for the balance sheet. We didn't want to extend. We certainly didn't want to do an equity raise or anything like that. Because again, alignment with shareholders is really important to us, to me. I mean, I'm the largest shareholder. So, and again, it's you pay debt when it's due.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it's about 190 million in debt retirement over the last two quarters. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.